What happens when jealousy and power turn a peaceful neighborhood into a battleground? In Willowbrook Heights, one woman's obsession with control flooded an entire community, all because of a single backyard creek. This is the story of how greed drowned a neighborhood, and how its residents rose together to reclaim their home. $300,000, that's what it costs to pump water from flooded streets. All because an HOA president filled my creek with concrete at 2A, M6 workers, tons of quickset cement. All because your little water feature made her house look boring. The next morning, rain hits, streets flood. Water rises fast. Families evacuate. The fire department carries people from their homes. And there she stands, pointing at me. "This is your fault," she screams. But karma's funny like that. It flows like water. Sometimes the best revenge is doing absolutely nothing. Just watching someone drown in their own disaster. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? If you have an HOA, trust me, you'll want to see how this ends, because this woman's power trip destroyed an entire neighborhood. And the way she paid for it, absolutely priceless. Ever wonder how some people are willing to spend $300,000 just to drown themselves? I'm Jack Morrison, and this is the insane story of how the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association turned our entire neighborhood into a giant swimming pool. All because they were jealous of the little creek in my garden. If you're watching from Florida, California, or anywhere with an HOA, drop a comment and let me know, because this story will make you want to double-check your HOA contract. And trust me, when an HOA digs its own grave, the view is absolutely worth watching. The day I moved into Willowbrook Heights, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with that swampy depression behind my house. As a retired hydraulic engineer who'd spent 30 years designing flood control systems, I saw potential where others saw problems. The realtor had actually tried to downplay it. Mentioning something about drainage issues and seasonal flooding, I just smiled and signed the papers anyway. Little did anyone know that this problem area would become the catalyst for the most expensive temper tantrum in HOA history. I spent the first 3 months studying the land's natural contours, testing soil composition, and mapping water flow patterns. My neighbors thought I was crazy, seeing me out there at dawn with my measuring equipment and notebooks. "What's the old guy doing now?" I'd hear them whisper. I didn't mind. I was following a philosophy my late wife Emily had taught me. We need water to live, but we need silence to understand. Every morning, I'd sit by that muddy depression, listening to how the water wanted to move. Understanding its natural path, by spring, I had transformed that eyesore into something magical. Using my engineering background, I created a closed-loop water feature that recycled rainwater through a series of small waterfalls and pools. Native plants filtered the water naturally, while solar-powered pumps kept everything flowing. The creek meandered through Japanese maples and flowering dogwoods, crossed by a small wooden bridge I built myself, my tribute to Emily, who had always dreamed of a garden that sang with water. Word spread quickly through Willowbrook Heights. Soon, families were stopping by during their evening walks, children pointing excitedly at the koi fish I'd introduced, couples taking photos on the bridge. I didn't mind the attention. In fact, I enjoyed sharing what I'd created. That's when I first noticed Patricia Hartford, our HOA president, standing at the edge of my property with her clipboard, that pinched expression on her face that would become all too familiar. Patricia Hartford was the kind of person who measured her grass with a ruler and believed the American dream came with a strict set of aesthetic guidelines. As president of the Willowbrook Heights HOA for the past 8 years, she ruled our little kingdom with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive newsletters. Her own house, a massive colonial at the end of Maple Drive, was what she called the standard for the community. Translation: boring, beige, and about as inspiring as a DMV waiting room. The trouble started when Patricia began her annual Willowbrook Heights Home Excellence Tour, a self-important parade where she showed off select homes to potential buyers. For years, Her house had been the grand finale, the supposed jewel of our community. But that spring, something unprecedented happened. The real estate agents kept asking to end the tour at my place instead. The water feature is just so unique, they'd say. It really sells the neighborhood lifestyle. I could see Patricia's face tighten every time someone complimented my garden. She'd force a smile and mutter something about maintaining property values, but her eyes would narrow like a cat watching a mouse. The final straw came when the local newspaper ran a feature story titled Willowbrook's Hidden Oasis, with a full-page photo of my creek. They didn't even mention Patricia's house 3 days after the article ran. I found an official HOA violation notice in my mailbox. The charge: unauthorized modification of property drainage systems and creation of potential flood hazard. The letter, signed by Patricia herself, demanded I cease all water flow immediately and attend a mandatory HOA board meeting. I remember standing there in my driveway, reading that notice and laughing out loud. They wanted me to stop water from flowing. They might as well ask me to stop the wind from blowing. I spent that evening drafting my response, complete with engineering diagrams, soil percolation tests, and 20 pages of calculations proving my creek system actually improved local drainage. I even included historical rainfall data showing the area had never flooded in 50 years. My favorite part was the section explaining how my design could actually prevent flooding by providing controlled water retention during heavy storms. I sent it all by certified mail, because if Patricia wanted to play bureaucratic games, I'd been dealing with government permits longer than she'd been alive. The next morning, I opened the Willowbrook Heights Community social media group to find it exploding with activity. Patricia had posted a lengthy screed about safety concerns and property liability, complete with ominous warnings about insurance rates and home values. But something interesting was happening in the comments. Neighbors were pushing back, sharing photos of their kids feeding the fish, talking about how peaceful the garden was. The community was splitting into 2 camps, Team Patricia and Team Jack. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7:40 p.m. in the community center. Patricia had marked it Urgent Flood Hazard Discussion in bright red letters on every notice. I arrived 15 minutes early to find the parking lot already full. Neighbors streaming in with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for town halls about zoning changes. As I walked in, I noticed something odd. Patricia had hired security. 2 burly men in black polo shirts stood by the door, checking names off a list. Since when did we need bouncers for HOA meetings? The community center had been set up like a courtroom, with Patricia and her 4 board members elevated on a makeshift stage. They'd even brought in a projector and screen, which struck me as excessive for discussing a backyard creek. I took a seat in the 3rd row, nodding to supporters who gave me encouraging smiles. Bob Mason, a fellow retired engineer, sat down beside me. "This is ridiculous. Jack," he whispered, "I've reviewed your plans. That system is better designed than half the municipal projects I worked on." Patricia called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. Yes, she actually had a gavel. "We're here tonight to address a serious threat to our community's safety and property values," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "As your president, it's my duty to protect Willowbrook Heights from unnecessary risks." She clicked a remote, and the projector displayed a photo of my creek, deliberately taken at an angle that made it look larger and more menacing than it actually was. "This is what Mr. Morrison has constructed without proper HOA approval," Patricia continued. "Our expert analysis shows this water feature poses significant flood risk to surrounding properties." That's when she introduced her expert, a nervous-looking young man named Derek, who turned out to be her unemployed brother-in-law. Derek stumbled through a presentation filled with terms he clearly didn't understand, showing computer models that looked like they'd been made in Microsoft Paint. The crowd grew restless as Derek droned on about hydraulic head pressure and subsurface water tables, getting basic engineering concepts hilariously wrong. When he claimed my creek could potentially create tsunami-like conditions during rainfall, I heard Bob snort beside me. Even Patricia's supporters looked skeptical. Finally, Derek finished with a dire warning. Based on my analysis, this creek could cause catastrophic flooding, affecting up to 30 homes. When Patricia opened the floor for questions, hands shot up immediately. But she had a strategy, only calling on her pre-selected supporters who asked obviously planted questions. "What about our children's safety?" asked Margaret Thompson, Patricia's best friend. "How will this affect our insurance premiums?" Worried Harold Benson, whose lawn service company mysteriously got all the HOA contracts. The whole thing felt like a badly rehearsed play. Finally, Bob Mason stood up without being called on. "I'm sorry, but I can't listen to this anymore," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I'm a licensed hydraulic engineer with 40 years of experience, and that presentation was complete nonsense. Tsunami conditions from a closed-loop garden feature? That's not just wrong, it's embarrassingly ignorant." The room erupted in murmurs as Bob continued. "I've reviewed Jack's plans. His system actually improves drainage. If anything, it's protecting us from flooding." Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Mr. Mason, you're out of order. This meeting follows Robert's rules." But Bob wasn't finished. "You want to talk about flood risk? Let me tell you about flood risk. In 1998, I lost my house in the Midwest floods. Everything I owned gone in 3 hours. You know why? Because developers ignored natural water flow patterns. They built in floodplains. They eliminated natural drainage. Jack's design works with nature, not against it." The meeting descended into chaos after that. Neighbors started shouting questions Patricia couldn't answer. Someone pulled up weather data on their phone, showing our area hadn't flooded in recorded history. Derek tried to defend his presentation, but only made things worse when he couldn't explain basic water physics. Through it all, I sat quietly, taking notes. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy is letting your opponent defeat themselves. As the meeting wound down, Patricia made one last desperate play. "Regardless of these discussions, the board has already voted, Mr. Morrison has 30 days to remove his water feature or face legal action." The room went silent. "You can't do that," someone called out. "The board needs community input for major decisions." Patricia smiled coldly. "Actually, according to bylaw 17-3, the board can take emergency action to protect property values. This vote is final." I stood up slowly, making sure everyone could hear me clearly. "Patricia, I'll see you in court if necessary. I have all the permits, all the engineering data, and apparently the support of our neighbors. But here's what puzzles me. Why does my little creek bother you so much? What's this really about?" Patricia's mask slipped for just a second, revealing something darker underneath. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped, grabbing her gavel and storming out. The aftermath played out on our community social media pages. Screenshots of Derek's ridiculous presentation became instant memes. Someone created a Save Jack's Creek group that gained 200 members overnight. But Patricia wasn't done. She started posting about unrelated violations, claiming my mailbox was half an inch too low. My recycling bins were visible from the street for 20 minutes too long. It was a campaign of petty harassment designed to break me down. Sarah Martinez knocked on my door 3 days after the meeting, introducing herself as a new resident who'd just moved in down the street. She seemed friendly enough, asking about the neighborhood while admiring my garden. "I heard about the HOA drama," she said casually. "Seems pretty intense for a suburban creek." Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. We chatted for a while before she mentioned she'd love to get more involved in community issues. I didn't think much of it at the time. New neighbors often want to understand local politics. That evening, I got a cryptic text from an unknown number. "Check your security cameras tonight. They're planning something." When I tried to reply, the message bounced back as undeliverable. Paranoid, maybe. But I'd installed cameras after the violation notices started, and something told me to take this warning seriously. I spent the evening pretending to watch TV while actually monitoring my security feeds on my tablet, feeling slightly ridiculous until around 11 p.m. When two trucks pulled up to my property line. The trucks bore the logo of Hartford Construction. And if that name sounds familiar, yes, it was owned by Patricia's cousin. I watched in disbelief as 6 workers began unloading bags of quick-set concrete and portable mixers. They worked with practiced efficiency, clearly having done this before. That's when I noticed Patricia's silver Lexus parked down the street, her silhouette visible in the driver's seat. This wasn't just a violation notice anymore. This was war. My first instinct was to run outside and confront them. I actually made it to my front door before stopping myself. Emily's voice echoed in my head. Never build with anger, build with wisdom. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started recording everything, making sure to capture license plates, faces, and, most importantly, the Hartford Construction logo. Then I called my lawyer, Tom Richards, who picked up despite the late hour. Document everything, he advised. Let them dig their own legal grave. The workers spent 3 hours systematically filling my creek with concrete, destroying not just the water feature, but also the carefully cultivated landscape around it. They even poured concrete over my Japanese maples, killing trees that had taken years to establish. I felt physically sick watching it happen, but I forced myself to keep recording. The security cameras captured Patricia getting out of her car once to give instructions, pointing at specific areas like a general directing troops. Around 2 a.m., Sarah Martinez appeared out of nowhere. I watched her on the cameras, seemingly out for a late jog, but she stopped when she saw the trucks. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, then appeared to make a call. The workers noticed her and seemed agitated, but she just waved and continued jogging. I wondered what a new neighbor was doing out so late. But I was grateful for the additional witness. When the trucks finally left at 3:30 a.m., I walked outside to survey the damage. My beautiful creek was now a grotesque concrete scar across the landscape. Dead fish floated in the remaining puddles. The wooden bridge sat askew, half submerged in gray sludge. Years of work, Emily's dream garden, destroyed in one night of vindictive rage. I stood there in the darkness, fists clenched, fighting the urge to march straight to Patricia's house and return the favor. That's when Sarah appeared again, this time walking directly to me. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said, but her tone was different. Professional, alert. I got everything on video, high definition, perfect angles. I stared at her, pieces clicking into place. "You're not really a new neighbor, are you?" She smiled slightly. "Investigative journalist. I've been tracking Patricia's HOA activities for months. This isn't her first rodeo, Jack, but it might be her last." The next morning, I called the police to report vandalism and destruction of property. The officers took one look at the concrete-filled creek and whistled low. "That's going to be expensive to fix," Officer Davidson noted, taking photos. "You have any idea who did this?" I handed him a USB drive with all the security footage. "I have a pretty good idea, and about 3 hours of HD video to back it up." Patricia arrived while the police were still there, playing concerned neighbor. "Oh my goodness, Jack, what happened to your beautiful garden?" Her performance was Oscar-worthy, but the officers weren't buying it. The sky had been threatening rain all morning, and as Patricia stood there feigning shock, the first drops began to fall. Within minutes, it turned into a downpour, the kind of sudden Texas storm that dumps inches of rain in hours. Water began pooling immediately, finding nowhere to go with the natural drainage system destroyed. The concrete had created a dam effect, and water started backing up into the street. Patricia's fake concern turned real as she realized what was happening. "This is just rain," she said nervously. "It'll drain away." But it didn't drain away. The water rose steadily, creeping up driveways and lapping at garage doors. My phone started buzzing with texts from neighbors. "Our street is flooding. Water's coming in under the door. What's happening?" The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia had created the exact flood scenario she'd warned about, except instead of my creek causing it, her concrete solution had turned our entire street into a catch basin. Within 2 hours, Willowbrook Heights looked like Venice during Aqua Alta. Water stood 18 inches deep on Maple Drive, with Patricia's house sitting at the lowest point of the neighborhood. Taking the worst hit, her perfectly manicured lawn was now a muddy lake. Her prized rose garden submerged. I watched from my slightly elevated position as she frantically called someone on her phone, gesticulating wildly at the rising water. The rain continued for 6 hours straight. By evening, the local news had arrived, broadcasting live from our surprise flash flood. Nobody could understand why our particular neighborhood was so badly affected when surrounding areas were fine. Well, nobody except those of us who knew about the midnight concrete pour. Patricia had to be evacuated from her house by the fire department, carried out in hip waders while news cameras rolled. The footage would later become legendary on local social media. The next morning, Willowbrook Heights looked like a disaster zone. The rain had stopped, but the water remained. Trapped by Patricia's concrete dam, the smell of stagnant water mixed with sewage backup filled the air. Residents waded through knee-deep water to survey damage, their faces a mix of confusion and anger. I stood on my porch, watching the chaos unfold, feeling oddly detached from it all. This wasn't how I wanted things to go, even if Patricia had brought it on herself. The HOA board called another emergency meeting, this time in the high school gymnasium since our community center was flooded. Patricia, looking haggard and wearing borrowed clothes, took the podium. This unprecedented flooding is clearly the result of unauthorized modifications to our drainage system, she began, pointing directly at me. Mr. Morrison's creek project has endangered our entire community. The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally standing there in flood-damaged clothes, blaming me for the flood she had caused. Before I could respond, Bob Mason stood up. Patricia, with all due respect, that's complete nonsense. Jack's Creek was designed to handle excess water. The flooding started after someone filled it with concrete. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Mason. Do you have proof? Bob smiled grimly. Actually, several residents have security footage of Hartford construction trucks in the neighborhood that night. Funny coincidence. The room erupted. People started shouting questions. Who authorized this? Why wasn't the community consulted? Is the HOA paying for the damage? Patricia banged her gavel, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. Then she played her trump card. The HOA has already contracted emergency flood mitigation services. The cost will be approximately $300,000, but it's necessary to protect our homes. The silence that followed was deafening. $300,000, someone finally asked. Where's that money coming from? Patricia straightened her shoulders. It will be covered by an emergency assessment. Each household will be charged approximately $1,200. The explosion of outrage that followed was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed at an HOA meeting. People were on their feet, shouting about lawyers and recalls and criminal charges. Through it all, Patricia maintained that this was the only solution to the crisis created by unauthorized modifications. That's when Sarah Martinez stood up. I have a question about the emergency contract, she said calmly. Is it true that the flood mitigation company is owned by Patricia's brother-in-law, the same person who presented the fraudulent flood risk assessment? The gymnasium went dead silent. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The contract was awarded based on competitive bidding? Sarah smiled. Really? Because I have copies of the contract dated 2 days before the flooding started. Care to explain that? The meeting devolved into chaos. After that revelation, Board members started distancing themselves from Patricia, claiming they hadn't been consulted about the concrete or the emergency contract. Residents demanded to see financial records. Someone mentioned calling the district attorney. Through it all, I sat quietly, remembering Emily's words about building with wisdom, not anger. The truth was coming out on its own without me having to lift a finger. 3 days later, the water finally receded. Revealing the full extent of the damage, landscape companies arrived to pump out basements and tear out water-damaged drywall. Insurance adjusters swarmed the neighborhood, shaking their heads at claims that didn't make sense. Flood damage in an area with no flood history. The costs were mounting rapidly, far exceeding the $300,000 Patricia had quoted for mitigation. And through it all, my concrete-filled creek stood as a monument to HOA overreach. That's when I received an unexpected visitor. Tommy Miller, an 8-year-old from down the street, stood on my porch, clutching a hand-drawn picture. "Mr. Morrison," he said solemnly, "I made this for you." The drawing showed my creek, the way it used to be, with blue crayon water, green trees, and orange fish. At the bottom, in careful block letters, he'd written, "Thank you for the beautiful creek. I'm sorry the mean lady broke it." I'm not ashamed to admit I teared up right there on my porch. Tommy's mother, Jennifer, apologized for bothering me. "He's been so upset about the creek," she explained. "He used to come here every day after school to feed the fish. It was his peaceful place." That conversation shifted something in me. This wasn't just about my fight with Patricia anymore. The creek had belonged to the whole community, and Patricia had stolen that from everyone. That evening, I made a decision. I wouldn't just restore the creek, I'd make it better than before. But Patricia wasn't done yet. The next morning, I received a registered letter from her attorney. The HOA was suing me for $300,000 in flood damages, claiming my illegal water feature had caused the disaster. Additionally, I was being investigated for tax fraud. Patricia claimed I'd built the creek as a business expense to evade property taxes. The letter demanded I cease all restoration efforts and preserve the concrete as evidence. The war had just escalated to a whole new level. The afternoon brought another surprise. Bob Mason showed up with a group of neighbors, all carrying shovels and wheelbarrows. "We're not letting her win, Jack," he said simply. "This creek belongs to all of us now." Before I could protest about the legal implications, they began carefully removing concrete, working around the edges where Patricia's crew had been sloppy. More neighbors arrived as word spread. Soon, 50 people were working together, turning the cleanup into a community event. Patricia appeared within an hour, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy. "Stop this immediately!" she shrieked. "This is destruction of evidence." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, they're cleaning up flood damage on private property. I can't stop that." Patricia turned to me, her face contorted with rage. "You think you're so clever, Jack, but I know things about you, about your past projects, about why you really retired early. It was a desperate bluff, but it revealed something important. Patricia had been investigating me long before the creek issue started." "What's this really about, Patricia?" I asked quietly. The workers had stopped to watch our confrontation. "Why does my creek matter so much to you?" For a moment, her mask slipped completely. "Because I was here first," she hissed. "I built this community. I made it what it is. And then you come along with your fancy garden and your engineering degrees, and suddenly everyone forgets who's in charge." There it was, the raw, ugly truth. This wasn't about property values or flood risk. This was about power, control, and crushing fear of becoming irrelevant. Sarah Martinez's investigation hit the local news the following week with the subtlety of a hurricane. The headline read, HOA President's Midnight Concrete Plot Floods Neighborhood, Costs Residents Thousands. The article detailed Patricia's systematic abuse of power, including embezzlement of HOA funds, rigged contractor bids, and a pattern of harassment against residents who challenged her authority. But the bombshell was the photo spread. Patricia at a wine tasting event with the owner of Hartford Construction, dated 3 days before my creek was destroyed. The story went viral within hours. Local news picked it up. Then regional, the concrete. Creek conspiracy became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. Our neighborhood was suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. News vans lined our streets. Reporters knocked on doors. Everyone had a Patricia Hartford horror story to share. Mike Peterson talked about being fined $500 for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of beige. The Johnsons described how Patricia had forced them to remove their children's treehouse because it was architecturally inconsistent. Patricia's response was predictably tone-deaf. She called a press conference on her front lawn, flanked by her attorney. "This is a coordinated attack on my character," she declared to the assembled media. "Mr. Morrison has orchestrated a smear campaign because he refuses to follow community guidelines. The flooding was an act of God, which my quick action helped mitigate." Even her lawyer looked uncomfortable as she spoke. When a reporter asked about the Hartford construction connection, Patricia snapped, "No comment," and retreated into her house. That evening, the neighborhood social media group exploded with activity. Someone had created an anonymous survey about Patricia's leadership, and the results were damning. Over 80% of residents reported negative interactions with her. 60% had been threatened with fines or legal action. Most shocking were the financial irregularities. Missing funds, questionable expenses, contracts awarded without proper bidding. The survey had over 300 responses in a community of 400 homes. The next day, Bob Mason did something unprecedented. Using an obscure provision in the HOA bylaws, he called for a special election to remove the entire board. Section 12.4 states that 25% of homeowners can petition for a recall vote, he explained at an impromptu gathering in my yard. "We have 35% already." The petition signatures had been collected quietly, house by house, while Patricia was distracted by the media circus. Democracy was coming to Willowbrook Heights. Patricia's desperation reached new heights. She sent cease and desist letters to anyone who spoke to the media. She threatened to sue Sarah Martinez for defamation. She even tried to get a restraining order against me, claiming I was inciting violence by allowing neighbors to gather in my yard. But her most audacious move was announcing a new emergency assessment of $5,000 per household to cover legal defense costs necessitated by resident harassment. It was financial hostage-taking, pure and simple. The community response was swift and unified. Residents organized a payment strike, refusing to pay any HOA fees until the board was replaced. Lawyers in the neighborhood offered pro bono services to fight the assessment. The local news stationed a reporter permanently on our street, documenting what they called the Willowbrook Rebellion. Patricia had unified the neighborhood in a way no block party ever could, united in opposition to her reign of terror. The recall vote was scheduled for the following Saturday. Patricia tried every trick to derail it, claiming the venue wasn't properly reserved, questioning signature validity, even suggesting the vote be postponed due to ongoing legal matters. But Bob Mason, with the help of several attorneys, had followed the bylaws to the letter. The vote would proceed. As the day approached, tensions in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. 2 days before the vote, I found Patricia in my yard at 6:00 a.m., taking photos of the creek restoration progress. "This is still an active crime scene," she insisted when I confronted her. "I'm documenting evidence." I noticed her hands shaking, her usually perfect hair disheveled. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "Patricia," I said quietly, "it doesn't have to end like this. Just resign. Let the neighborhood move forward." She spun to face me, tears in her eyes. "You don't understand. This is all I have. Without the HOA, I'm nothing." The admission hung in the air between us. I thought about mentioning the financial reports Sarah had uncovered. Patricia's failed real estate ventures, the house that was mortgaged 3 times over, the mountain of personal debt she'd been hiding, her HOA president's salary and kickbacks from rigged contracts were apparently keeping her afloat. But I held back. Even now, I couldn't kick someone when they were down. "It's not too late to do the right thing," I said instead. She just shook her head and walked away. The day before the vote, a moving truck appeared at Patricia's house. Neighbors watched in confusion as furniture was loaded throughout the afternoon. Was she fleeing? Admitting defeat? The mystery deepened when her attorney released a statement. Miss Hartford maintains her innocence, but feels the toxic environment created by certain residents makes it impossible for her to continue serving the community she loves. It was a retreat disguised as a victory, a surrender wrapped in defiance. That evening, we discovered why Patricia had really left. Federal investigators had been quietly building a case against her for tax evasion and wire fraud related to HOA funds. The concrete incident had triggered scrutiny of her finances, revealing a web of shell companies and false invoices going back years. She wasn't just leaving the neighborhood, she was potentially facing prison time. The mighty HOA president had fallen, brought down not by our votes, but by her own greed. The recall vote proceeded as scheduled. Even with Patricia gone, her remaining board members were swept out in a landslide. 96% of residents voted for change. Bob Mason was elected interim president, and his first official act was to drop all legal action against me. But Patricia's parting gift was already in motion. The lawsuit against me for flood damages had been filed in state court, and her attorney intended to proceed. The fight wasn't over yet. My lawyer, Tom Richards, was actually excited about the trial, Jack. "She handed us a gift," he explained. "We file a countersuit for destruction of property, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We turn this into a referendum on HOA abuse." I wasn't thrilled about prolonging the conflict, but Tom convinced me that a legal precedent could help others facing similar situations. Plus, my insurance company was eager to recover damages from Patricia's actions. The trial date was set for 3 months later, giving both sides time to prepare. During discovery, Patricia's attorney tried every delay tactic in the book, but Sarah Martinez's investigation had been thorough. She documented everything with the precision of a seasoned journalist. Email trails showed Patricia's months-long campaign against me. Financial records revealed her kickback scheme. Even her browser history showed searches for how to legally destroy neighbors' property and HOA president liability protection. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, Derek, Patricia's brother-in-law, who'd given the fraudulent flood presentation. Flipped sides completely. Facing his own legal troubles for false professional credentials, he provided a sworn affidavit detailing how Patricia had coached him to lie. He even produced text messages where she promised him $10,000 to make the creek sound dangerous. The fool had kept receipts of his own fraud. As the trial approached, I received an unexpected call from Patricia herself. "Jack, can we talk?" Off the record. Against my lawyer's advice, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. She looked different, older, deflated, wearing jeans instead of her usual power suits. "I want to settle," she said without preamble. "I'll pay for the creek restoration. I'll drop the lawsuit. I just want this to end." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Why should I trust you now?" I asked, genuinely curious. She stared into her coffee for a long moment. "Because I've lost everything already. My house is in foreclosure. My husband left me. The federal charges. I'm probably going to prison, Jack. I just don't want to be remembered only for this." for being the crazy HOA lady who flooded her own neighborhood. It was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. I thought about Tommy Miller's drawing, about the neighbors who'd helped dig out concrete, about Bob Mason's quiet dignity in the face of Patricia's bullying. It's not just about me anymore, I told her. The community needs to see justice done. They need closure. Patricia nodded slowly. Then, let me give them that. I'll admit everything in court, on record. I'll testify about the kickbacks, the harassment, all of it. Just let me do one right thing before I go away. Tom nearly had a heart attack when I told him about the meeting. She's playing you, Jack. This is another manipulation. But something in Patricia's defeated eyes had seemed genuine. After much debate, we agreed to a partial settlement. Patricia would admit guilt, pay restoration costs, and testify about HOA corruption. In exchange, we'd drop the emotional distress claims and recommend leniency in her federal sentence. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. The trial became less about water damage and more about systemic HOA abuse. Patricia, true to her word, took the stand and laid bare 8 years of corruption. She detailed how she'd skimmed funds, intimidated residents, and wielded HOA rules like weapons. When asked why she'd targeted my creek specifically, she paused before answering. Because it made people happy. Because they stopped paying attention to me. Because I was terrified of becoming irrelevant. The courtroom was silent after that admission. Judge Williams, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach and dry humor, seemed alternately fascinated and appalled by the testimony. During a particularly technical discussion about water flow rates, she interrupted. Let me get this straight. Miss Hartford spent $50,000 of HOA funds to destroy a garden feature that was actually preventing flooding, then spent $300,000 to pump out the flood she caused, all because she was jealous. Do I have that right? The summary was so absurd that nervous laughter rippled through the courtroom. The verdict was never really in doubt after Patricia's testimony. Judge Williams ruled in my favor on all counts, awarding damages that would fully restore the creek, plus additional funds for the Japanese maples Patricia had killed. More importantly, she issued a scathing commentary on HOA overreach that made legal blogs across the country. Homeowners associations serve valid purposes, she wrote, but when they become weapons of personal vendettas, the law must intervene. The real victory came during sentencing in Patricia's federal case. Dozens of Willowbrook residents submitted letters to the court, not asking for maximum punishment, but describing how the community had healed since her departure. Bob Mason wrote about implementing transparent financial practices. Neighbors described the Creek Restoration Festival, where the whole community had worked together. Even Tommy Miller sent a crayon drawing of the new creek with fish and flowers. The judge, citing Patricia's cooperation and the community's forgiveness, sentenced her to 18 months in minimum security plus 5 years of probation. The creek restoration took 6 weeks and became a community project unlike anything Willowbrook Heights had ever seen. Bob Mason organized work crews with military precision. Local landscaping companies donated materials. The garden club designed native plant installations. Even the kids got involved, painting rocks with messages of hope and unity to line the water's edge. What Patricia had destroyed in one night of rage, we rebuilt with weeks of collective joy. The grand reopening was set for Memorial Day weekend. The morning of the ceremony, I stood by the rebuilt waterfall, watching the first water flow through the system. It was better than before. We'd added a meditation area, a children's discovery zone with educational signs about local ecosystems, and a small amphitheater for community gatherings. The wooden bridge had been rebuilt, wider and stronger, with benches where people could sit and watch the water. The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Bob Mason spoke about the power of community resilience. Sarah Martinez, now a friend rather than an undercover journalist, read a piece about how the creek story had inspired HOA reform legislation at the state level. Tommy Miller released the first new fish into the pond as photographers captured the moment. But the highlight came when the community voted on the creek's new name. Freedom Flow won by a landslide as I stood to speak. I thought about everything that had happened. The destruction, the flood, the trial, Patricia's downfall. When I built this creek, I was following my late wife's wisdom. We need water to live, but we need silence to understand. What I didn't realize was that we also need conflict to grow. Patricia Hartford, in her misguided way, gave us a gift. She showed us what we're capable of when we stand together. The crowd murmured in surprise. I continued. I've learned that karma isn't just about punishment. It's about transformation. Patricia tried to destroy something beautiful out of fear and jealousy. In response, we created something even more beautiful. Not just this creek, but a real community. So, in a strange way, I want to thank her. Without her actions, Freedom Flow wouldn't exist. And neither would the bonds we formed after the ceremony. As neighbors mingled and children played by the water, Bob Mason pulled me aside. Jack, there's something you should know. We've been talking, and the community wants to create the Emily Morrison Memorial Garden around the creek. If you're okay with it, I had to turn away for a moment. Overwhelmed by the gesture, Emily would have loved this. Not just the garden, but the way disaster had brought people together. The final twist came 3 months later when a letter arrived from federal prison. Patricia's handwriting was still perfect. Her message brief. I saw the photos of Freedom Flow online. It's beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't see that before. Thank you for the truth in court. Maybe when I get out, I can volunteer for the garden maintenance. I'm learning that building is better than destroying. I read it twice, then filed it away. Redemption is possible for anyone. But some bridges take longer to rebuild than others. Today, Freedom Flow is the heart of Willowbrook Heights. The HOA, under Bob's leadership, has become a model of transparency and community service. Property values have increased, not because of strict aesthetic rules, but because people want to live in a neighborhood that takes care of each other. The emergency fund Patricia depleted has been restored with strict oversight and public audits. Even our HOA meetings have waiting lists now. Turns out, people engage when they're treated with respect. As for me, I still sit by the creek every morning, listening to the water and remembering Emily's wisdom. Sometimes Bob joins me, sharing stories about the latest community projects. Sometimes it's young Tommy, now the official fish guardian of Freedom Flow. But mostly, I sit alone, grateful for the unexpected journey that began with a simple desire to create something beautiful in my backyard. Looking back, I realized the greatest irony of all. Patricia was right about one thing. The creek did change property values and the fundamental nature of our community, just not in the way she feared. Instead of dividing us, it united us. Instead of lowering values, it showed us what we truly value. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing your enemy a better way to live. The water keeps flowing, carrying away old grievances and bringing new possibilities. Families gather for picnics. Children learn about nature. Neighbors who were strangers become friends. And somewhere in a minimum security federal prison, perhaps Patricia Hartford is learning that power isn't about control. It's about service. That's the real lesson of Freedom Flow. Water, like justice, always finds its level. And sometimes, to teach someone that lesson, you just have to let them dig their own hole. If you've watched this far, you probably have your own HOA stories. Drop them in the comments below. And remember, the next time someone tries to bury your dreams in concrete, just wait for the rain. Mother Nature has a wicked sense of humor. And karma, well, karma flows like water. It always finds a way